And now we want to go right away in a deeper conversation on the topic with a panel, which has been entitled Transformational Digital Learning, Insights and Reflections. And I have the pleasure to introduce you to our panel moderator, Ms. Amy Bellinger. Amy is actually the head of programs for the Education Commission. She established and is leading the Education Workforce Initiative and the High Touch High-Tech Initiative, and is a strategic advisor to the Deliver At initiative. So I will hand over now to Amy, and I understand that you have assembled a great group of experts, and also you have a poll for us. So over to you, Amy. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Jost, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. It's fantastic to be here today, and welcome to the International Skills Forum session on Transformational Digital Learning, Insights and Reflections. We've just had two fantastic talks from Guri and from Kartik, and we aim to build on those in our panel today. They really made a great job of emphasising the school closures that affected 1.5 billion children around the world. And as of July, less than a third of children in low and middle income countries have been reported at going back to school. So governments have obviously turned to technology to help mitigate this learning loss. Now, Guri and Kartik highlighted some of the issues that this has then caused. So the digital divide, insufficient access to digital infrastructure, lack of support to and readiness of teachers and parents to embrace digital technology, and lack of low-cost effective solutions. And importantly, as they've both highlighted, mixed evidence on which EdTech solutions actually work. So the purpose of today's session is really to build on their insights and draw on insights from those who have researched or implemented digital transformation programs around the world. They'll discuss the potential of evidence-based approaches like personalized and adaptive learning, use of assessment, and the importance of trying to harness an ecosystem approach to really transform learning using digital technology. We will also try and discuss issues that have received less attention in discussions and come up with some practical ways forward to reach scale. So we have a fantastic keynote talk ahead and panel, and we do bring together a real variety of different perspectives and insights from many years working in digital education. So we will start with a keynote presentation from Professor Juho Lee. Juho is Chairperson of Education Commission Asia and a Commissioner for the Education Commission. He has served as Minister of Education, Science and Technology in the Republic of South Korea and written many articles and books on human capital and development and the use of technology. Professor Lee will present the Education Commission's work on high-touch, high-tech, harnessing adaptive learning technology and the power of teachers. This is very much his vision, and he will share some of his reflections and insights. Just before Juho does the presentation, I just want to quickly introduce the rest of the panel and also do a short poll. So after Juho's keynote presentation, we'll hear from Carmen Strigel, the Director of Technology for Education and Training at RTI International. And Carmen's work at RTI focuses on the intersection of neuroscience, technology, and learning. And her passion lies in teacher development and the pedagogic integration of technology with a focus of supporting learning of children with diverse needs. That will be followed by Jeffrey Jian, a senior education specialist at ADB. Jeffrey is a member of the expert pool in education technology, where he engages in education projects using ICT and education technology to promote education equity, efficiency, and efficacy in teaching and learning. He was previously CTO of the New Oriental Education Technology Group. And then we are delighted to have Madhav Chavan, founder and president of Pratham. Madhav co-founded and led the development of Pratham, pioneering large-scale innovations to address literacy problems amongst India's underserved children. He expanded Pratham's reach from Mumbai to 2/3 of India, with programs including early education, remedial education, libraries, and support for at-risk children, and has harnessed technology as part of that. He received the 2012 Wise Prize by the Qatar Foundation. And Akanksha Bapna is a senior research fellow at the EdTech Hub. Akanksha has worked extensively in K-12 education, bridging the gap between policy, research, and practice. Previously, she worked with JPAL at MIT and India's top think tank Centre for Civil Society, where she led education research. So you can see we have a great mix of researchers, implementers, experts, and policymakers as part of our panel. And then after the panel, we'll hear comments from two ADB colleagues. Sunhwa Lee is a principal social sector specialist who has developed and managed higher education skills development and social development programs, and Yumiko Yamakawa, a senior education specialist whose areas of expertise include education and skills development, sector planning, system strengthening, and education financing. I will then give you the opportunity to ask questions. So please, any questions that you think of as you're listening to these presentations, please use the Q&A function to enter your questions there, and I will ask our panelists, and then we'll draw the session to a close. So you can see there's a lot to get through, a lot of people to hear from, but just before we start, I wanted to give you the opportunity to participate in a poll. So I think the poll will hopefully be shared on screen. I will talk you through the options, and if you could respond, I'll share the results straight away. The following have been identified as barriers for effective digital learning in developing countries. Which to you and your country is the most critical barrier? Please choose one. A, digital infrastructure, connectivity and devices. B, effective government policy and strategy for digital transformation. C, readiness of teachers as key stakeholders for digital learning. D, parental or community support for out-of-school learning. Or E, EdTech providers supply in the country to support the development of customized technology platforms and localized digital content. Please cast your votes now. So I think if it's what I can see on the screen, that it's the digital infrastructure that seems to be the most critical barrier. So we will talk about that, but we will also touch on all the other points because they all make up the whole ecosystem of what's needed for transformational digital learning. So thank you very much for that. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over now and invite you to Professor Joo-Ho Lee to present his keynote speech.
Thank you very much, Amy. It is my great honor to make a presentation on high-touch high-tech for all for ADB 9th International Skills Forum. High-touch high-tech for all is an emerging global initiative that aims to deliver personalized learning for all students by combining the unique strengths of the teacher and the power of technology. Over the past 15 years, randomized evaluations have shown that teaching at the right level consistently improves learning outcomes. There has also been interest for developing higher order skills, yet teachers have very little time and often little training on how to do this. Integrating adaptive technologies with tailored support by teachers has potential to provide personalized learning at scale. Adaptive learning software can help students remember and understand knowledge. This can be combined with personalized teaching, where teachers provide individual support to each student based on data from the adaptive software, as well as using active learning approaches to teach higher order skills such as applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Vietnam prototype has shown great promise. In partnership with Vietnam Ministry of Education and Training and Arizona State University, we developed a prototype that explored the role of teachers within an adaptive learning context for grade 7 mathematics. The math test scores improved by 0.436 standard deviation which is equivalent to 2 years of learning in just 1 semester. To scale up the successful prototype, I think we need to consider EdTech supply and business model, human capacity, enabling infrastructure, and education policy and strategy according to the Omedia Network's ecosystem approach. I'm very happy to share the Korean high-touch high-tech consortium experience. The Education Commission's Asia Hub, Education Commission Asia, was established in 2020 with the mission of providing high-touch high-tech for all. To this end, it has launched the high-touch high-tech consortia. We have university consortium with 27 universities and 8 EdTech companies. And we also have K-12 consortium with 7 cities and regions, 4 schools and 4 foundations, as well as numerous youth and welfare centers. Now we are developing EdTech consortium as well. The mission of high-touch high-tech K-12 consortium is narrowing learning gaps for K-12 students in partnership with various districts and cities across Korea. We target students from low-income, disadvantaged, and marginalized backgrounds. We emphasize one-to-one mentoring and guidance for students' academic and social-emotional growth and provide training programs to develop competent mentors. We work with community leaders, including mayors and governors, in addition to education leaders. We collaborate with innovators and reformers who can overcome the high hurdles for the first movers. We also provide a platform to match innovators and reformers with funders and educators. Finally, we incorporate impact evaluation studies right from the beginning. The mission of high-touch high-tech university consortium is promoting inclusive innovation of Korean higher education institutions by providing support to higher education institutions, incorporating the high-touch high-tech approach in their curricula. We also serve as a platform for cooperation and lesson sharing among participating institutions. We started with prototype projects. We work with champion or pioneer universities like KDI School, Aju University, Hanlim University, and so forth. We also invited the participation of global partners such as McGraw-Hill, Cengage, Pearson, and Wiley. We also took advantage of network effects of multi-sided platform. We incorporated impact evaluation studies right from the start. We do have a lot of challenges. I would like to share the strategies to overcome the challenges. The first challenge was concerns of teachers in incorporating technology into the classroom. To overcome this, we pursued a gradual shift in the role of teachers by alleviating their workload in teaching content knowledge and focusing more on the high-touch element. We also consulted with university presidents regarding various options for professors, including support through CTLs, the provision of teaching assistants, and other incentives. To overcome the reluctance of education institutions in collaborating with EdTech innovators, we provided opportunities for institutions to enter into partnership with most appropriate EdTech providers and courseware through matching events, consultation meetings, and seminars. To overcome the perception of parents and education associations that the technology might impair students' personality and creativity, we provided assurance and confidence for high-touch high-tech as a holistic approach that combines both the technology and human connection. So, encouraged by the success of Korean high-touch high-tech consortium, UN Special Envoy and Commissioner Chair Gordon Brown announced the launch of high-touch high-tech for all. Mr. Brown issued a call to action for new partners from across the ecosystem to join this consortium in hopes of accelerating learning progress for all children. High-touch high-tech global consortium will analyze, act, and amplify high-touch high-tech for all. High-touch high-tech 2021 was first step towards global action. It served as a meeting grounds for the diverse actors of the high-touch high-tech ecosystem and brought about opportunities to proliferate the high-touch, high-tech learning approach. Global leaders showed strong support for high-touch, high-tech as an innovative and holistic learning approach with potential to reach more and more diverse students. They emphasized there is a need for radical and thoughtful innovation in education that effectively harness the power of technology. They also stressed collective leadership and strategic partnerships are critical for the successful expansion of high-touch, high-tech to overcome the digital divide and allow adaptability to various local contexts. They also stressed that teachers are at the heart of high-touch, high-tech approach. Meaningful change can only occur through, from, and with teachers. I will conclude with my final insights and reflections. High-touch, high-tech shows a promise for teachers as it radically reduces their burden of delivering content knowledge. High-touch, high-tech shows promise for parents and students as it provides students with active learning experiences for socio-emotional growth and the cultivation of their higher order thinking skills. High-touch, high-tech shows promise for policymakers as it shows promise as a scalable learning approach. In order to provide high-touch, high-tech for all, together we must turn this crisis into an opportunity, start small, scale smart, build open, multi-sided platforms for leaders and innovators in education, technology, infrastructure, finance, public policy, and academia. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Lee, for that keynote. I think it really highlighted the importance of consortium, multi-stakeholder collaboration, partnerships, all ingredients essential to the success of digital learning. So thank you very much for that. So I would like to follow up by asking one of our panelists, Jeffrey, to share, based on your support you've given to various ADB projects, what the key factors are in helping countries consider how to ramp up capacity for interventions such as high-touch, high-tech. And how do we systematically assess and monitor the progress of those projects?
Okay,
are we able to go to Jeffrey next?
Yep. Thanks, Amy, for the introduction. And thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for your presentation on the high-touch, high-tech adaptive learning approach and sharing the successful experiences with adaptive learning tools and platforms. In order to roll out a technology intervention proven effective in developed countries context to a developing country context at scale, I think the key question is, what are the key factors we need to look at to maximize the investment? Let's first look at real-time examples of technology interventions with a very standardized solution. For example, an interactive whiteboard, which has proved effective in many developed countries in past years because it empowers the teachers to structure more interactive classrooms, increases the teacher to student engagement, and making the learning process more fun. When this is making its way to the developing countries, however, we see many challenges. One of the challenges, so this project actually rolled out to the whiteboard to 30% of the schools in the country. However, after 1 year later, and we look at the outcome, many of the whiteboards installed were found to be either rarely used or broken. So the results show very limited impact to the student learning outcomes. So we then look at the different factors to see why it didn't achieve the desired outcome. So first, we look at the infrastructure pillar. Some of the classrooms where the whiteboards were installed has no network connectivity or even a stable power supply to maximize the usage of device, the full potential. Second, we look at the enabling government policies on the project. There's no maintenance or support funding for devices after rollout. There's also no tracking of the device usage by teachers. The policy actually, the guideline instead stipulates if the whiteboards are broken, the teachers need to bear the cost of the repairing. You can see from the teacher's view, there's really no incentive for using the device but there are penalties for device repairs. And thirdly, if you look at the teacher's perspective, they didn't get the necessary training to fully utilize the device capabilities. And the same situation is true with the students, where they are, they're not getting the needed training on how to use smartboard to do, for example, presentations of their own projects. And some of the boards were broken by misuse from students as well. So the fifth pillar here is the providers, where because no funding to engage a support partner to timely address any technical issues or integration issues I've seen from the government pillar. So the next slide, if you see, if we look at another real-time project, so this project is for content portal development and rollout, which is, I think, we have seen quite a lot during the COVID situation. Similarly, if we look at the 5 pillars, very similar lessons learned on this project intervention as well in aligning the interdependencies between the 5 pillars across these key factors. I won't repeat the analysis now here, but want to only call out one common lesson learned for this project. There's no tracking of which students accessed what contents to really get feedbacks on the quality and the popularity of those contents. And there's no tracking on how much time each student spend on the contents to link with their learning outcomes. So, and these data visibilities are actually key components for adaptive learning solutions, such as high-touch, high-tech. So we then recognize the landscape and define the Digital Education Readiness Index, what we call the DARI toolkit and framework. This is basically with 5 pillars, 20 subcategories, and 76 total indicators. These are the important factors to assess at a country level, region level, school level, as well as an individual project level, to ensure all the relevant and interdependent factors are assessed and aligned together to ensure the successful rollout of any technology interventions and digital transformations. A lot of times we don't have to be that high tech. Yesterday, the keynote speech, actually from the panel discussion, Iran from Breck shared with us the very effective mobile-to-mobile teleconversation model with just a feature phone and scaled up successfully. I think this photo shows an interactive classroom in action. The teacher uses a standard smartphone to collect the real-time learning outcome data in the classroom. She obtains immediate feedback for each individual student learning progress and status that the teacher can then adjust her lesson plan accordingly for this class. And after class remediation as well for students who still have the knowledge gap. This is already using over 100 countries, and some people might have seen this. The tool is called Picker. So the next slide, if you see, another real classroom learning feedback system is using a $5 clicker. Each student basically, which will also feature, the clicker features a speech recognition capability for assessing, for example, students' pronunciation and other capabilities. And about 10 million students use this form of classroom interactions in China. So again, the deployment of the rollout is successful because it did follow the important factors we have identified earlier and aligns very well with the interlinked factors such as creation and curation of digital contents, teacher training, and providing the provider support for continuous upgrades to the learning systems and the contents in local language. So that's all I have. And back to you. Thank you very much. And back to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I think that Digital Education Readiness Index looks super useful for governments as they consider how to harness technology. And I saw some recurring themes about assessment, measurement, and really thinking about sustainability from the start. So I just want to follow up on a question about assessment to Carmen. Carmen, what are the innovations you've seen driven by technology in cognitive and non-cognitive assessments, and how can they be harnessed as part of adaptive learning approaches?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question, Amy. I'd be happy to share some insights and reflections on innovations that use technology in student assessment. In recent years, my organization, RTI International, which is a nonprofit research institute headquartered in North Carolina in the United States, has worked on a range of innovations in using technology for assessment. We've developed and piloted assessments that use technology to assess both cognitive and non-cognitive skills, that use wearable sensors, games, as well as offline mobile platforms. Some of these approaches have since been refined and are actually now being increasingly scaled in the Global South and beyond. Now, why use these technology-supported approaches in the first place? Well, I'll discuss the question for each of the three approaches shown here on the slide, and then also give you a little visual for each. So for sensor-enhanced assessment, we use technology to essentially obtain physiological data from students while they're doing an assessment or a learning task. So these data may include things like heart rate, pupil dilation, or the sweat response in the palms of our hands. The premise for this innovation was really that such data may give us some more objective insights into the learner's emotional state and their actual sort of readiness to learn. A child that's anxious and that is tired will not be able to perform as well as when feeling confident and ready. Next, for the last 6 to 7 years, RTI has also done research in game-based assessments. We started off with just trying to understand what are even the skills that are most relevant, particularly to secondary school students and to industry and employers. And we then explored how to best assess these effectively to inform where opportunities and where gaps may be. Our aim here is to really develop assessments that can be reliably and effectively administered in offline contexts. So choosing games as a medium offers really several advantages. First, which child or youth does not like to play games, right? I mean, even we adults like to play games. But second, and most of all, games allow us to automatically observe applied behavior. So for example, rather than asking a student in a questionnaire, are you punctual? In a game, you can ask them to be at a hypothetical place and time, and then automatically track whether the student has fulfilled the requirement. So games really allow us to also unobtrusively measure such things and allow us to get insight into applied behaviors and knowledge rather than relying on self-reported data. Lastly, some now 10 years ago, we've launched our open source student assessment and coaching platform, Tangerine. And we've been able to sustain this open source products, reaching millions of learners in over 60 countries and 100 languages since. More recently, we've added 2 new functionalities to Tangerine. First, we've developed an approach to assess executive functions in very young children. So executive functions such as working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility, they're really a critical foundation for learning, whatever subject or competency area. And they're traditionally quite difficult to assess, particularly in our context and with young children. Next, we have developed a formative assessment version of Tangerine called Tangerine Teach, which supports teachers in systematically conducting quality formative assessments and giving effective feedback to their students. Tangerine Teach can be adapted to any curriculum and subject and be flexibly updated based on schools or government's needs. We're currently piloting Tangerine Teach also in virtual learning scenarios to help educators teaching remotely better understand the skills and needs of their students without being physically with them in the classroom. So now let me share with you a bit of a visual on these different innovations. So on this next slide here, you can see one of the sensor systems that we have studied for our research in sensor-enhanced assessment. So this particular product allows us to measure several of these physiological data streams at the same time. Since our research is largely focused on the more like conceptual and data management side of things, it's really independent from the specific system that is used, as sensors are also available via other devices, such as watches, glasses, keyboards, mice, or via a tablet or computer that the student may be using while taking an online lesson or using another digital tool. What's a little tricky with these kind of assessment approaches and looking at these physiological data streams is to actually then match them to the data from the assessment or the digital learning task. Also, there are quite some interpretational challenges. Sometimes it's very difficult just by looking at these data to actually interpret whether a student is negatively anxious or positively excited. As our physiological response may actually be quite similar, but as you can imagine, the result on a student's performance is quite different. Obviously, for very low resource contexts, having high-tech sensors may not be feasible, but leveraging sensors that are increasingly built into cheaper and cheaper devices, such as mobile phones and tablets, may be a viable scenario to work towards. And this is important because if we really talk about personalized and adaptive learning, just imagine a future where personalized learning goes above and beyond adapting content based on content-specific responses, but can actually adapt to the emotional and physical well-being of a learner and just tell a child, go play. In our work in game-based assessments, for which I'm showing you a few screenshots here, we have been focusing on developing games for both cognitive and non-cognitive skills, particularly problem solving and conscientiousness. So research, particularly in the higher income world, suggests that these are highly predictive competencies for a child's later performance in school, work, and life. So aside from offering the potential for a more reliable assessment of certain skills, as students are actually applying the skills rather than self-reporting them, this may also help with some of the challenges that we have seen, particularly also during this past year with motivation and engagement, particularly of older learners and secondary school students. So meeting students where they are and assessing and helping them learn through the medium and platforms they enjoy, such as games, may help mitigate for some of those factors. And given the very small technological footprint, these are games that run on any Android device entirely offline. This is something that can be deployed in a wide range of countries in the region already now, and really offering the potential for better insights into students' actual and applied skills. Now, on the side of the developments and innovations that we have recently launched in Tangerine is an assessment approach to assessing executive functions. So executive functions are really sort of the air traffic control of our brains. They're the cognitive processes and abilities that are really important for organizing information, for planning, for problem solving, for our ability to sustain attention and to orchestrate thought and action in support of goal-directed behavior. So as mentioned, we now have assessments in Tangerine that rigorously measure these aspects of working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. But just imagine, and this is a research that we're working on, like what such tools would allow us to do if they would help us to actually identify at-risk students early on and before they're falling behind and may become into a disability track or program. And so these predictive tools could be particularly valuable in this context. And lastly, as mentioned, we have expanded our Tangerine functionality also to include formative assessment. So using a teacher's own Android device or any device provided to them, teachers can set up their class roster in the app. They can select from a list of pre-developed assessments and then conduct these assessments with their students. Tangerine automatically, and again, this is all offline, scores the students' results, and then provides the teacher with very easy to interpret reports, and most of all, pedagogical guidance on what to do next. So more than just, oh, X% of your students got this correct, but what are you actually going to do with each of these groups of students based on their performance? How can you stretch their learning? How can you help them mitigate their gaps? And what can you as a teacher change to better meet their needs? If you want to learn more about Tangerine Teach, let me give a little shout out to the upcoming Innovation Marketplace, where my colleagues from Kyrgyzstan are going to present on how they have adopted Tangerine Teach for that context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carmen. It was fascinating to hear some of those innovative approaches to using assessment and also pushing our thinking on what adaptive learning actually means and to go beyond content. So thank you so much for that. Madhav, I would now like to ask you a question. Despite the significant improvements to access to education in India, children are still struggling with reading and maths. What are the key innovations that Pratham did differently to tackle this learning crisis? I know you included assessment as a core part of that and teaching at the right level. I'm interested to know, to what extent did you use technology as part of your response?
Oh, thank you, Amy. Our experience in the field of education has focused on learning to read and learning to do arithmetic and so on. Can I see the slide? I can't see the slides on my screen. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. If you go to the next slide. So let me just come down to the main point. The main two major issues that we try to deal with. One is the problem of lack of basic reading, writing, math skills. And the other is the issue of rote learning accompanied by chalk and talk teaching in middle school onward. Now, it is not necessary to answer the question Amy has raised, to use technology everywhere. And I'll give you an example. Now, you've used the term teaching at the right level. Now, we invented teaching at the right level technique, but very few people really know what teaching at the right level is. Can we go to the next slide, please? Sorry. So what it involves is, first you assess all the children at baseline. Whether these children are in school or in villages is really depending upon the circumstances. And then once you have the children classified according to their levels, which I'll come to in a minute, you conduct 3 different kinds of activities. One is a whole class activity where children can sit down, listen to a story or something, and discuss things among themselves, think about new words they have learned and so on. After that, they break up into small groups, and then they start working together on what they've learned in the whole class. For example, if they've heard the story, they could sit in the group and do a mind map. And then finally, there is individual activity. We recognize that all these 3 are important. I'm saying this because there's a lot of emphasis in education technology on personalized, individualized learning, and less emphasis on children's group activities and doing things together. Of course, then you do periodic assessments to check progress of children, and then you reorganize groups of children. Could I have the next slide, please? This is a non-tech approach. This is our assessment tool. I know most of you don't know Hindi, but you can make out that one on the left side is the Hindi reading passage. So one, you get a long passage with lots of words. That is the 2nd grade, 2nd standard reading level. Then you have a paragraph. Well, there's a 4 lines really, that is standard 1. And then there are some words and there are some alphabets. So the child can either be at the highest level of being able to read a standard 1 paragraph or standard 2 paragraph, or just words and not more, or only alphabets. Now, once you know that, you can group the children according to their level. The same thing you can do with arithmetic. Either you know how to do your division, or not that, then only subtraction. You can recognize numbers, 2-digit numbers or 1-digit numbers. So you are then at these levels made into groups. And as I said, you either start the class working with the whole class, or in small groups, or individual. Next slide, please. So when you do this, and periodic assessment is done. It depends. In learning camps that we have, periodic assessment can be done every 20 days or so. And what you see here is the progress that is achieved. In the reading levels, you can't see the lower part. So it's from left to right, it is going from baseline to end line. In schools in the state of Karnataka, with a very large number of children, they started with 29% children being able to read grade 2 level, story level, and that went up to 65%. And if you add to that grade 1 story level, grade 1 paragraph level readers, then you start with something like 52% children and going up to 85%. So a huge amount of progress is achieved by this simple non-tech approach. The cost is very, very marginal, especially in the schools where it's the teacher, where it's a learning camp in the communities. The cost is also not more than $10 per child. And this period is not more than 60 days. So if you look at this, then the question is this really necessary to involve technology to achieve this kind of progress? Instead, go to the next slide. So once children have learned to read, we apply a hybrid learning approach. And in this, there are 3 basic requirements of doing the hybrid learning. And this I'm talking about not school. We are not doing things in school for the reasons that many people have discussed. For example, the devices that are given to the schools never use, or they break, or the children don't really get to use them. So what we do is, we've been working in this village communities or even urban slum communities. And we work with 3 things. One is we create a social structure in the community. So you work with children older than 10. These messages are distracting me. Then children from their own neighborhood and learning, they form their own learning groups. Older children in the community, youth, become volunteers, we call them coaches, who help the children, and mothers are included as well. Of course, all these people have to be trained, but that's easy. That's not that difficult to do once they are motivated. Ultimately, everything boils down to motivation and interest. If the children in the community can be motivated to learn, all this is easily possible. The second one, apart from the social structure, so you can imagine a village community being divided into small groups of not more than 7-8 children in a group, and that each group actually works on a curriculum. What is the curriculum? It is not age grade based curriculum and like it's in the school. We have divided the curriculum into 3 parts. We call it learning for school, which is what your math curriculum and the science curriculum may be. Now, here the assessment is different. It is not the assessment like school. In the schools, as Karthik was saying, there's a filtration process. This assessment is not based on the curriculum, age grade curriculum, but it is based on children going according to their levels. If the child has gone from, say, in the mathematics, for example, from number recognition level, then he will be tested on the subtraction level, and so on. That is learning for school. There is the other part, learning for life, and there is learning for work. Now, these are deliberate. These are the most interesting pieces of curricula that children love to participate in. And what those do is that children get motivated, get interested in learning everything. And this is something that the school doesn't give. We want to build children's learning for life and learning for work. Now, in this, the curriculum, the main part in this curriculum also is that the technology is being used in the schools. In most EdTech applications, it is subservient to the school syllabus and the curriculum, and a linear age grade curriculum. What we are trying to do is make it different. See, the strength of this education, this technology, digital technology, is that it is non-linear. When you sit on the computer, if you are on the internet, you can jump from one subject to another subject, one level to another level, organize your own learning. But the learning process, somehow, we have created linearity in this learning process that is making the technology linear as well. So we want to give in this, while the curriculum is there, the actual application of the curriculum is so that children can do self-learning a lot more easily. Finally, now in the poll also it has been shown that people feel that the infrastructure devices is the first number one problem and the hurdle. So what we are trying to do is, in this community where there is a social structure of small groups of children, we have two things. One is there is a digital device library which has a Raspberry Pi content repository. There's a data card which can access content from the internet, and about 3 to 5 tablets depending upon the resources available. So all this costs about $1,000. And these tablets are not stored away in the school. Now, this is a major learning that we have. The reluctance that people have in giving to schools is because schools don't hand the devices to the children because they are afraid that the children will break them. What we found with very large number of tablets being handed over to children is that we actually created a project in which we budgeted for change of tablets or buying new tablets every year. But what we found was that tablets actually survived for 3 years. That is because the parents and the children took care of the tablets very carefully. So that is one digital device library in a school, in a village, that takes care of the need of devices and in a centralized sort of way. But other than that, we also have all these children access smartphones and ordinary phones that they have, which can be used for learning purposes as well. Can I go to the next slide? So I will end now with some observations, some thoughts. First of all, we found that although we have mobile phones given by children and their families for learning purposes, I think mobile phones are too small for interactive learning. And if you take away the smartphones that are there, if you say that, if you take that away, you find that there are not that many devices available. Now, how do you mix the use of mobile phones with non-tech is the key. So I've made some points here. Digital devices are not really meant for delivering knowledge. That's what our education technology applications are. We have children going around with their tablets, making their own films, making their videos, teaching each other, and so on. So in conclusion, I'll say that combining digital and non-digital is very important. And I'm not sure high tech is the answer in the developing world. We need to have high touch, clearly, and it's not difficult to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madhav. I think you made an important point about when thinking about harnessing digital technology, need to think about everything else, the way that education is delivered and what works for effective teaching and learning, and make sure that the technology is supporting that and not trying to do something different. So thank you very much for that. And finally, I'd like to invite Akanksha to share your research and your thinking on the ecosystem and network approach to digital transformation. And I think this builds to some extent on the readiness index that Jeffrey mentioned earlier, and also the consortium and ecosystem approach that Juho mentioned in his keynote speech. So we'd love to hear more about your research on a systems approach to EdTech. It'd be great if you could explain a bit more what this means and what its implications are. Thank you, Akanksha.
Thank you so much, Amy. Just checking, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Okay. So it's really an honor to be at the end of such an illustrious list of speakers. And I'd like to thank the ADB for this opportunity to speak here. My name is Akanksha Bapna, and I'm a senior research fellow with the EdTech Hub. Just quickly, the EdTech Hub is a research consortium funded by the UK government to develop evidence on education technology. Just also being at the very last has set the stage for what I needed to say and make a case for a systems approach to EdTech. And what I will do is just quickly pick out some of the points that the speakers before me have spoken, and that's actually really building on the presentation that I have planned. So we saw that Karthik talked a little bit about students who are at the bottom of the quartile tend to learn best in these personalized learning platforms. He also mentioned how there is challenges with administrative data, and there is a whole bunch of political economy factors going behind that. Then Gauri spoke about a number of factors responsible for implementing effective EdTech, including choosing the technology, the surface, the software, as well as making sure that the stakeholders and the policy environment is on board. Also about mentoring, communities, platform funders, impact evaluation, etc. And then Jeffrey brought about this really fantastic digital education readiness index with 76 indicators that need to be taken care of. So all in all, there's a mind-boggling set of factors which are responsible for a child learning using technology. And the fact that learning actually happens is quite a miracle. So setting that stage, I will now summarize that EdTech is complex. It is highly context dependent. An example, as we have seen, is computer-aided learning programs, which have very different impacts on different kinds of audiences and different ways in which things are being taught, or the different kinds of subject matter that is being taught. So math and language, for example, have very different outcomes. Then we see that there are complex causal pathways. So very straightforward, seemingly straightforward intervention like giving access to devices may or may not work. It is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for learning to happen through technology. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of scale and sustainability challenges. There are a complex set of factors, government policies, market dynamics, the ecosystem, political economy factors that go into it. So how do we try to make sense of all of this is what our work is about. So far,
a number of frameworks and approaches have taken a very linear thought process. And even in previous presentations, just to make a case in point, is we've seen a list of factors that go into trying to implement EdTech effectively. It's either A to B to C, or it's a cyclical approach. But what we are arguing is that everything is complex and it's interconnected, and it's a huge web that needs to be looked at the same time in order to actually have an effective implementation of EdTech. And I'll quickly give an example of why systems approaches can actually bring insights which were not necessarily visible earlier through some of the work that we have done. So what is systems thinking? System thinking looks at relationships between problems, and it considers that there are indirect and not very obvious causes and consequences, that the actors themselves have a significant control or influence over the system, and then there are a lot of unintended consequences. So we may be giving us a certain intervention in one place, but it could have a certain outcome in a different location which was not planned or required. Lastly, we need to be looking not just at each individual entity, but also we need to think about improving or changing the relationships between these entities. And it also overall thinks about the fact that we can look at a few coordinated changes by considering it holistically instead of going and having this brute force approach in trying to fix every single aspect within the system. One of the disadvantages of this approach is it requires people working in this manner to hold ambiguity in their heads for a very extended period of time. And we do not necessarily have clear-cut answers. So being able to deal with that is something that requires a slight mental shift. However, systems approaches allow for the structuring of many, many variables into meaningful patterns. And they allow us to visualize patterns or outcomes or incidences which are not necessarily visible using linear approaches. It also, of course, adds a whole host of analytical tools if you're doing research using systems approaches. So what we found in our work, what we did is we collected all of the existing EdTech frameworks. These include frameworks, including the ADB framework or Medear framework, the TPAC framework, and these range from being micro-level frameworks to macro-level or policy-level frameworks. We collated all of these, and then we coded these frameworks for the kinds of stakeholder interactions that exist within them. Once we coded all of these and we collected and plotted together using social network analysis, we found something very interesting, which was not emergent or not visible to us when we were just analyzing the data in a qualitative manner. What we found is the obvious was that policymakers are a very important cog in the wheel of EdTech. However, employers, and these have been mentioned, I think, by Carmen right before, drive or have a significant influence within the EdTech system, ecosystem. So employers are a very significant node, which was not necessarily visible using linear approaches, which has now become evident using a systems approach. We can leverage this within the system to actually make significant movements. For example, if employers are demanding a certain skill set, then technology can be geared around to doing that, and overall system level change can be brought about through leveraging this point. This is just a quick summary of what we've seen, but essentially the point I wanted to make is we need to think a little bit differently. Education and education technology are fairly complex, and we need to step out of our traditional linear ways of thinking in order to be looking at it more effectively. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akanksha. I think that was a good way to summarize, I guess, some of the points that have been mentioned throughout the speakers today, and to put forward the rationale for an ecosystem approach. Thank you. So just before I invite Sunhwa and Yumiko to respond with comments, I just wanted to remind the audience that now is your time to put your questions in the Q&A chat function. We've got lots coming through, but please do add yours, and I will do my best to ask them after we've heard comments from the ADB sector specialists. So I would like to firstly then invite Sunhwa to provide some comments in response to these presentations. Thank you very much, Sunhwa.
Hello.
Thank you, we can hear you well.
Hello.
Sunhwa, do you mind coming off mute? I think you've accidentally put mute on.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for excellent presentations and discussions. All the speakers covered such a comprehensive issues that are essential for the effective use of EdTech or digital learning and ensured improved learning outcomes. Given the prolonged school closure during the COVID pandemic, remote learning through digital devices has taken such a central stage in transformative education. And this was not limited to mid-income or developed countries, but this was also happening in our developing member countries, or called DMCs for short. Once the schools reopened in our DMCs, we are hoping that concerted efforts and strategies are in place to close the learning gap, which has widened during the pandemic, especially among children from low income versus higher income families. And we see a great potential and promise and expanded role of digital learning, such as a personalized adaptive learning, which can help students learn at their own pace. And in my comments, I would like to share my comments on three aspects, which basically echo the points made by our speakers and panelists, more based on the experiences and ongoing lessons which are coming out from our DMCs in South Asia in particular, which include India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. First of all, several rapid surveys have been undertaken in our DMCs, which show that there has been a significant learning loss, especially foundational learning among grade 1 to 6 students. And this also has been pointed out by the panelists. According to one survey in India, for instance, about 40 to 65% of the students at grades 1 to 6 are found to have lost their reading and math skills during the pandemic. And other surveys that ADB or other development partners have taken also show that, as expected, students from private schools or high socioeconomic status had a better access to digital device and remote learning opportunities than those from government schools or lower income families. And when schools reopened, with or without digital devices, personalized learning will be crucial in address such a learning loss through remedial instructions and narrowing the learning gap. And Pratham also has shown that there will be a lot of personalized learning even without digital devices, and there are low-tech interventions which Jeffrey has also pointed out. And we see such a digital learning could have a potential to scale up. One question is, the application or the effectiveness of the digital learning, how does it really vary across different schooling levels and grades. Do we really apply it through grade 1 through 12, or what are the sort of some of the varying strategies that we need to consider for the different groups? And as pointed out by all the speakers, actually the role and capability of teachers are very important. And either be more so in the developing countries where teachers' initial qualifications are not so strong. Hence, therefore, it will require significant transformation of their pedagogy and even perhaps their fundamental teaching philosophies to ensure that teachers support students with the continuing also interactions, not only through digital devices. Our survey findings also indicate that students having spent nearly a year at home for remote learning express the greatest yearning to interact with the teachers and students in their learning experience. So I think all this digital learning, how to make it really interactive, without losing the human touch will be also important. The second point that I want to make is one important source of persisting disparities between children from low versus higher income families seems to arise also from home learning environments, especially parental guidance during remote learning experience. And this is beside the issue of access and availability of devices. And as you know, many students in rural areas or low-income communities are first-generation school attendees. Therefore, a substantive role of parents in learning in low-income families may be quite challenging. While digital learning in school settings may be able to bridge such disadvantages, as Ms. Guri also Gupta pointed out, additional attention to parental role and the community-wide support will be needed in low-income families or communities, even for digital learning in the context of out-of-school learning. I think Dr. Juhu Lee's presentation or Jeffrey also pointed out this community parental support. Finally, I just want to also echo this system approach. The use of EdTech programs, including personalized adaptive learning, has taken a great popularity in developing countries. Believe it or not, in a country like India, there are sometimes too many options presented to decision makers, especially at the local level. And a little too fragmented approach may be also used at the pilot level. Therefore, the use of any particular EdTech program needs to be carefully designed with the technology and pedagogy, using a really systematic approach, as pointed out by our speaker and panelists. That will be important. In addition to incorporating evaluations in the design, it will also require continuous monitoring and appraisal of the program implementation and performance to make sure that proper teacher training is incorporated, required materials are integrated into interventions well aligned with the clear results or goals. So let me stop here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sunhwa. I would like to invite Yumiko just to make a couple of very quick comments, if that's okay, Yumiko, so we have plenty of time for audience Q&A. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Amy, and thank you very much for all the keynote speakers and panelists. This has been a great learning opportunity for me, and I'm sure that the participating audience from the government, from our client countries, and the partners are also learning a lot from these insightful lessons, and with a very good, promising news, as well as cautious or the bad news that we have to learn from the past. So I just also want to share one of the projects that we are supporting this Department of Education in the Philippines. Philippines, as you know, has closed school from March 2020, and they moved to full blended learning without any face-to-face. So the Department of Education and ADB has been working to operationalize this basic education learning continuity plan. And we have started our small technical assistance project, which actually gave me some sort of assurance that we have incorporated lots of important lessons from the past to the design. And I got a lot of reminder that we have to be really continuously monitor and assess this project implementation. In terms of design, yes, we have ensured, the contents, digital contents will be developed with lots of gamification elements or simulation exercises, not only providing these devices. By the way, for those schools that we are providing the low-cost tablets, they are actually located in a very remote community. They are categorized as last-mile schools without stable electricity supply nor the internet connection. So we are actually providing this local area network supported by solar panel, solar batteries. And of course, as many of our panelists have pointed out, trainings or the awareness raising for teachers, students, and parents are also incorporated. And of course, the impact evaluation. This is also planned. I hope we are not coming up with the negative result, as one of the keynote speakers allowed us. And we hope that we can also share some of the good outputs as well as lesson learned, maybe in the next skills forum. I just also want to remind myself as well as our government counterparts as well as stakeholders, we are learning from the lessons. I was personally in one of the sub-Saharan African countries when this one laptop per child came in as a shooting start. And then we know the result and what we learned, what needs to be improved. So my key takeaways, just to conclude my comments. So we have to really address these binding constraints. Binding constraints in terms of governance and pedagogy. That's really the key takeaway for me to implement some of those projects we are implementing with the government. And partnerships are key. ADB alone cannot really do this comprehensive support. We are reaching out to the private sector, NGOs, and academia, really to ensure the comprehensive partnerships. My last key takeaway, or maybe question to the panelists, I believe education is not only for acquiring the cognitive learning. Education and schooling for children means more than that. They actually learn socio-emotional skills as well as interpersonal skills. We have learned to a certain extent, technology can also provide such opportunity for children. But I still believe that the face-to-face interaction among the children, among the peers, with teachers, with senior students, actually means a lot. So we hope that technology will supplement to develop such kind of socio-emotional skills of children. That's my last takeaway from the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yumiko. Really helpful points that you summarised there. I'm going to move straight on to the Q&A, and I'm going to ask the first question to Jeffrey, which was, I think, as acknowledgement that to really make this shift to harness digital transformation, it requires substantial policy support and other tangible resources to really be able to make it happen. And the question was whether within ADB there are any models or forms of support to address the skills gap. And I'm assuming that's particularly for policymakers and for those that have to design and implement the policies to enable digital transformation. So Jeffrey, I'll ask you that one first.
Okay, thank you, Amy. A great question. So that's part of the reason we are starting to create the framework and the indicators and the indexes, so that we can start to putting the policy implications along with within the ecosystem. So this is the in terms of the skills development, I think both for K-12 school education also applies to higher education and skill development, TVET in the future as well. But hopefully we can reuse the framework to address some of the needs from our DMCs to help them making the right preparation and readiness for the digital transformation coming up. So I'll stop here. Back to you, Amy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we've had a question or a statement saying that EdTech seems to be, very much diffused into society without real consideration for its consequences. And Akanksha, I noticed in your presentation, you talked about, part of the systems approach helps you think through some of those unintended consequences. I was wondering if you could expand on that a bit more and explain how those unintended consequences can be potentially addressed using the systems thinking approach so that they can be kind of preempted and resolved before they happen.
Thanks, Amy. So I'll make two fairly disparate points to bring this together. One was something that Dr. Madhav Chavan mentioned, which was the teaching at the right level that requires this classwork, the group work, as well as the individual work. And technology has become a lot more personalized, and by that it automatically also means individualized in the current scenario. The second piece is where systems thinking actually comes from is from an ecological approach. So from what happens in nature and in biology. And one of the classic examples that we see is when they were trying to change the ecology of, I think this was Yellowstone National Park. They introduced foreign animals, I think that was foxes, and it completely changed the ecology in manners which was not known at all. The entire chain of predators, etc., changed down the line. In bringing that back to technology, if we are looking at children in a very personalized manner, and particularly given the context of the pandemic currently, this personalized learning piece is not necessarily considering the social interaction aspect of it. And in surveys that we've also done at the beginning of the pandemic, children were already beginning to feel the need for social interaction. What are the sort of downstream consequences of children not being able to interact, work in groups, or physically see each other as they do in schools or in a classroom setting is something that we're not yet able to see. There's definitely going to be a lot on the psychology side, and I think Carmen can chip in on this as well, because we don't really know what impact this is going to have for children. I have heard, again, in different contexts, that very little children who've mostly seen people in masks are now very afraid of strangers because masks are invariably correlated with the bad guys. So we don't really know how this is going to have an impact on children, and those are the sort of unintended consequences. And we need to really be looking at a very all-round perspective, whether it's a microsystem, which is a child and family, or it's a macro system at the policy level, to be able to understand what really might happen down the line.
Thank you, Akanksha. And a slightly related follow-up point. We've received a comment that learning through games sounds great and fantastic, but have there been any studies or research on what the health consequences might be? So it's slightly related to what you said, Akanksha, and I was wondering if I could ask Carmen for any thoughts or feedback on that, please.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And to sort of tie it back to Akanksha's answer and call out, I mean, certainly much more research is needed on the psychological effects, as well as on some other health effects that this sustained and prolonged engagement with technology may yield. The evidence base we have to date is rather mixed. And it's mixed because technology doesn't equal technology. I think if one thing we have learned from this forum already, just in the 1.5 days we have had, is the diversity of what EdTech actually looks like, the different technologies, the different softwares, the different platform, and the different applications for learning, for administration, for communication, etc. So it's really, really hard if you want to do very rigorous research to sort of disaggregate, what a certain result or what a certain impact may be, kind of managing this multitude of factors that play into this. Having said that, I think what we do glean from the research that has been done to date is that there certainly, and I think this is also common human sense, is a degree of too much, right? And that is if technology, video gaming, for example, really takes place to the exclusion of everything else that allows us to live healthy and productive lives, of physical exercise, of social contact, of laughing with others, of breathing fresh air, it likely is not healthy. It likely doesn't support a well-rounded development, well-rounded growth. And there's been a lot of research into the degree to which this may foster potential tendencies to violence, etc. But what we are talking about is not that. What we're talking about here is the very carefully orchestrated tactical deployment of technology where it adds value. Obviously, we need to research that. We need to find out where it adds value. But just to give one sort of reference to how games can actually really serve health is in 2020, the United States Food and Drug Administration has actually for the first time approved a video game as a health intervention for children with ADHD. So, again, it's the design, it's the when and how it's being used that may impact whether or not a technology or an application or any intervention yields positive or potentially detrimental results.
Thank you very much, Carmen. That was a great example to hear about the positive impact on health. Madhav, I have a question for you, just on what are some of the best practice approaches on encouraging parents and the community to engage more with children's learning, whether that's digital or not, and particularly in providing feedback to schools on how they think their learning and their education is going. I was wondering whether you had any examples from Pratham that you could share on how you engage parents and the community in doing that.
So the best example, unfortunately, is from the pandemic time. When we started using the community groups and started giving them inputs, started giving mothers content, started talking to these volunteers, young volunteers, and this was done on phones. So we would talk to them on the phone and ask them to give feedback about what the children were learning, what they liked or what they did not like, only on phone. And we found that the parents really got interested. This is one thing that happened during the pandemic, that until the pandemic came around, we were separating the school and the home. But now the school is gone and everything is gone to the parents and the people around them. And so they are more interested. And when you ask them to give feedback, when you ask them to help the children, they can do it. They are getting interested in doing that. In fact, mothers themselves are trying to learn what they did not know before. So I'm not so sure that you can give feedback to the teachers, but suppose if we talk about post-pandemic, if the relationship between the teacher and the parents has to change. Earlier it was something at a distance, but if the relationship changes and we rely more on parents, and if the parents are willing to take more responsibility, that will be better. I don't know whether I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think you're right. I think the pandemic has changed the relationship between parents and school and teachers. And I'm sure that's a really helpful example. I'm sure there are lots other from the pandemic time too. Just a reminder to the audience that we've still got time for a couple more questions. So if you have any more burning questions you wish to ask the panelists, please enter them into the Q&A. In the meantime, I have another one for Jeffrey. From someone who says that they're just providing some equipment to 17 institutions with smart boards, multimedia, and other related setup. And connectivity through a stable internet connection and power supply is a challenge. And how could that organization use your 5 pillars that you outlined as part of your presentation and thinking through everything needed to make sure that that implementation and that use of that digital devices and connectivity is harnessed effectively?
Yeah, thank you for a good question. So yeah, I think there are indeed, those are some of the challenges that we have seen in developing countries due to the digital infrastructure. I think as we highlight in the poll, is one of the key challenges and barriers. And there are different ways to do that. Yesterday, there's a good discussion our digital technology group organized around connectivity, how you can get connectivity to schools, how you use different means, affordable approach to bring connectivity to schools and households. So there are extensive discussions and also study around this so that we can hopefully have more cost-effective solutions for that. And power, there's also similar infrastructure level project that need to be invested into this. I think the challenge is of course the funding. I think the country is already being struggled with limited funding in the education sector, and those infrastructure funding hopefully will coming out the country priority into this, so that the education funding is not cut because of this. So that's my quick feedback on that. And also around the 5 pillars, so one of the key things I'd like to highlight is what we call the global approach. Global means we have to use the global practices and the resources, standards. That's, as one of the digital principles says, reuse and improve. But at the same time, we have to rely on the local context, local infrastructure. We have to look at the local readiness and situation, not one size fits all. We have to really help each country with its unique situation to help to improve. So that's the global approach that we're gonna have to adapt to the developing countries in EDB. Thank you. Back to you, Amy.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And finally, I'd like to ask Juho the final 2 questions, if that's okay. The first one is one that I know we have a lot with the term high touch, high tech, but how can that be used in low resource contexts such as Africa? And perhaps explain about the different adaptations can be made to context. And then the second question is really picking up on this high touch element that's come through a lot in the discussion and points today. I know as part of high touch, high tech, you thought a lot about the importance of the high touch component and how that can free up time for teachers to really focus on the group work and the problem solving. So it'd be great if you could just expand on that, Juho. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for very good questions. First question about the low resource countries like in African regions, particularly. You know that I can share the Korean experience in 1970s. We were relatively poor in 1970s, but the government really prioritized vocational high schools. So at that time, the CAD/CAM machine, computer-aided design and computer-aided manufacturing machines are really the cutting-edge technologies at that time. But in South Korea, if you want to find CAD/CAM machine, the only place you can get is in the vocational high schools, not in the central government, not in universities. The only place they can get is from the vocational high schools. That indicates how we prioritize to import cutting-edge technology equipment to educate the future technicians in South Korea. So even if African countries are relatively resource scarce, but maybe they can prioritize in high tech, high touch, high tech, and maybe as you discussed, it must not be a cutting edge high tech like AI assisted high tech, but you can think about the combining the high touch with low tech, for example. That could be another strategy. And another recommendation is maybe you can focus on teacher colleges in African countries. Teachers in African countries they have not plenty of opportunity to get good lessons. So maybe you can think about the project to teach to be teachers with adaptive learning coursewares and to teach how they combine high touch pedagogies with adaptive learning coursewares for the to be teachers. Although it could be very expensive for those countries, but it would be really worthwhile because I mean, teacher education it could be really high impact for the future education in African countries. Second question is about the high touch. Maybe the South Korean example, the high touch, high tech, the narrowing the gap consortium could be quite interesting for you. You know that we first worked with cities and local regions, especially for mentoring programs. And we found out that many places like orphanages and the welfare centers, youth centers for the multi-ethnic youths. So in some places they already have adaptive learning courses in their facilities, but they were never used. And actually, we found that this is not really the problem of high tech, but it's really important to combine high tech with high touch. So we really focused on training mentors to enable them to utilize adaptive learning coursewares for those disadvantaged students. So it really turned out to be very successful. I mean, many students in orphanages, many students in North Korean defector families, they started to enjoy learning because before the project, they cannot understand what teachers teach because it's not really at the right level. But because they can work with adaptive learning courseware and can be guided by mentors, they started to enjoy learning. So it was really the amazing experience for us. If it worked for orphanage students and students from North Korean defector families, it can work every student, right? So that's why I'm being more and more convinced that high touch, high tech will work for all the children.
Thank you so much, Juho. So it remains for me to say thank you so much to all our panelists today for sharing your insights and reflections. And just to a 1 minute summary from me, clearly transformational digital learning is highly complex, but there are frameworks to help governments think through all the different factors that need to be considered in harnessing technology. Sustainability obviously has to be considered from the outset. Evidence-based approaches used where possible, and it's important to monitor progress and adapt and evaluate as we go along, and that those lessons are shared amongst us all so we can learn from all of our work in this area. And finally, obviously, the point was clearly mentioned that technology obviously can't be considered by itself and that it has to be looked at in concert with all the other in-person, high-touch learning that children need to succeed. And just to make the final point, picking up on what Kartik said, that really for digital learning to be successful as part of a an educational approach, it does need to be focused on learning, and everything about the digital learning needs to be aligned across the ecosystem, across all the actors within it, to ensure that every child can learn. So thank you once again to everyone for a stimulating session, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Amy
Thank you.
Bellinger.
Thank you,
and
Amy.
all the panelists.